Hey guys, and welcome back to episode 2 of Killers Across the US. My name is Liz, and today we're going to be talking about a man by the name of Butcher Baker. But before we get into the video, I do just want to remind you guys to subscribe so you don't miss out on any future content, and be sure to like this video so I know that you enjoyed it. And if you haven't already, please go check out episode 1 where we talk about Thomas Whisenhat. And with that, let's get right into the video.
Alaska, a state known for its beautiful view of the northern lights, its amazing scenery, and its midnight sun. But in the cold town of Anchorage lay a dark, dark secret.
Robert Hansen was an extremely shy kid with a stutter that would carry out into his adult life. Because of that, he was bullied heavily when he was younger, which would then fill him with vengeance for the rest of his life. On June 13, 1983, police received a call between 3 and 4 in the morning that a young woman was running down 5th Avenue, handcuffed and naked. A driver passing by saw Cindy, picked her up, and dropped her off at a local inn, at which point the clerk at the inn had called the police. That night, Cindy was working as a prostitute and was offered $200 from Robert to spend the night with him. She did later explain to the cops that she did have an inkling that $200 for the night was too good to be true. However, money is money, and she took the offer. As soon as Cindy got into the car with Robert is when he pulled a gun on her and told her not to scream. He brought her back to his house where he essayed her and then chained her to a pole in his basement. He ended up falling asleep, which gave Cindy the opportunity to look around and get familiar with her surroundings. He then drove her to the airport where Robert talked about flying off with her somewhere, just because he liked her so much. As Robert was loading the car is when Cindy made a break for it and escaped from the car, leaving behind all of her clothes, including her shoes. Cindy was able to identify which plane had belonged to Robert to the police, and airport security was able to identify which car Robert had been driving that night, and both the plane and the car were registered under Robert's name. Robert was a local resident who owned a local bakery. Cindy was taken to the hospital where they performed a rape kit on her. Police arrived at Robert's house, where Robert was oddly very cooperative and allowed them to search his entire house without a warrant. And the state of the house was identical to the way that Cindy had described it in her report. Hunting equipment was everywhere, along with stuffed animals from his hunting trips. However, there was no evidence of a crime found in Robert's home, but he did agree to come down to the station for questioning. He had told police that he had been in a friend's house at the time that Cindy claimed that she had been essayed and kidnapped. His friend also confirmed his whereabouts, which gave Robert an alibi, at which point Robert was then let go. Also, unfortunately, due to the fact that Cindy was a prostitute, the police had come to the conclusion that she was lying and ended up throwing out her entire case. Robert would often go hunting to escape his stressful life working at the bakery. He was very good at hunting moose, deer, and mountain goats. However, he began hunting a much different kind of prey. On October 15, 1971, Robert spotted a young woman in her car. He thought she was very attractive and he wanted to talk to her, so what better to do than to follow her home? Well, that jumped from 0 to 100 real quick. Slow it down there, Robert. Let's just start with a simple, "Hi, how are you?" and we'll go from there. 18-year-old Suzie Heppered had the day off that day. She worked as a receptionist at a real estate office, and she was out running errands when Robert had spotted her in her car. When she arrived home, she had planned to take a shower, and just as she was about to hop in, she heard a knock at the door. She then wrapped herself with a towel and then went to go answer the door. She right away recognized who Robert was, as she had seen him at a stoplight right next to her. He asked her if he could come inside and use her phone book, in which she reluctantly agreed. He flipped through the pages for a while, just killing time, and ended up telling Suzie that he couldn't find what he was looking for. And then he asked if he could take her out on a date. She then broke the so unfortunate news that she was already engaged, at which point Robert left with his tail between his legs. 2 days after that super romantic, totally not creepy at all, encounter, Suzie pulled into her apartment complex and got out of her car, and Robert jumped out of nowhere, pulling a gun on her. She started screaming. Honestly, who wouldn't? And Robert once again said, "If you keep screaming, I'm gonna shoot you." But she didn't care and she just kept on screaming. Her roommate overheard all of the fuss, and at which point then called 911. Robert started to push her into his car, but by this time police had already started swarming the scene. Robert then took off on foot, so it didn't take long for police to catch up to him. When they searched his car, they found a .22 caliber pistol tucked away under his front seat. At this point, Robert was charged with assault using a deadly weapon, and despite his obvious state of being out of control, he was released pending his trial. Because his lawyer was able to argue that he was a family man with a stable income, he was a homeowner, and a decent person. Don't know what kind of decent person goes around sexually assaulting and killing people, but okay. I also don't think his stable income was stopping him from killing anybody else, but, you know, go off, I guess. And this charge surely was not enough to slow him down either, because on December 19th, he did it yet again. 18-year-old Patty Roberts was about to go into a cafe for a hot cup of tea when Robert caught sight of her. He thought she was very attractive, so he walked up to her and asked her out on a date. Alright, Robert, I'll give you some points back for that one. It wasn't creepy. It wasn't creepy. Are you kidding me, Robert? She rejected him, so he pulled a gun on her. Get it together! Robert forced Patty into his car, where he drove her way out of town. He stopped at a random motel where he began to essay her, and then took her out into the woods where he planned to kill her. However, Patty was able to convince Robert that she wouldn't tell a single soul of what had happened tonight. Robert grabbed her wallet and wrote down all of her personal information, and he let her know that if she ever spoke a word about her, he would not only kill her, but her entire family. And then he dropped her back off at the original cafe that he had took her from. And for a while there, Patty did end up keeping her word. How long's that candle been out? Hold, please. Just gonna slide that back in there. Anyways, when Patty read the news of a young woman found frozen to death in a ravine, she started to regret keeping her silence. A young girl had disappeared when hitching a ride to a convenience store. She was found with her hands tied behind her back and her chest cut open. And right after Patty had seen the news, she immediately reported what had happened to her at the police station. And they were able to go to the motel and confirm Robert's identity. Robert was arrested yet again, and at the police station, he was asked to remove all of the contents of his wallet. And inside the wallet, they had found a little tiny note with all of Patty's information on it. At which point, he tried to tell the police that he had not a clue how that got into his wallet. Could you at least, if you're gonna lie, make it a good lie? But because they did not have a warrant yet, while they waited to get the warrant, they went to book Robin into the station. However, there is one mistake the police made, which was letting a rookie check in his belongings. Robert, unfortunately, was a little smart in this moment, as he told the rookie cop that that piece of paper had the information of the guy he was going to call to bail him out. So the officer gave him the paper. He gave him the paper. And of course, it was never seen again. I think we all know why. And without the piece of paper as the key evidence to this case, it turned into a he said, she said. And unfortunately, due to Patty's past history, the defense was able to paint her as an unreliable source. And yet again, of course, two of Robert's friends went on to the stand to say that he was a family man with a stable income. And a family man with a stable income and a business owner could never be a serial killer who sexually assaults and kidnaps women. They were also able to get a psychiatrist to go on the stand and say that he was a schizophrenic with manic episodes, which of course was complete and utter bullshit. But this did allow Robert to plead no contest to all three cases, and the judge ended up sentencing him to 5 years in jail, out of which he only served 3 months. Now, one would think that getting repeatedly caught for your crimes would tell you to stop. However, Robert literally could not care less about the charges against him, as he went on with his agenda, only now being much more careful with the victims that he was choosing. In between meetings with his parole officer, he would pass by prostitutes and strip clubs, which gave him a little bit of an idea, as he would start to choose and kidnap sex workers, as they were often overlooked by cities. Robert would now only prey on women who had absolutely no one who would notice that they were missing. And on September 12th of 1982, a couple of officers wanted to go out moose hunting. However, instead of finding a moose, they actually found a shallow grave. And once they had dug up the grave fully, it turned out to be a young woman who was fully dressed and appeared to be shot right in the chest. She also had what looked to be a blindfold wrapped around her head. And right next to her grave is where they found a shell casing from a .22 caliber rifle. And the coroner was able to determine that she was there since the spring. And she was identified the following morning as 24-year-old Sherry Morrow, who was of course an exotic dancer at a local club. And she was reported missing by her boyfriend way back in November of '81. And this case very, very quickly went cold as the police didn't have very much to go on. And the police started to get many reports of other sex workers who had gone missing throughout the years. Roxanne Eastland, who was 24, Lisa Futrell, 48, Joanna Messina, 24, and Sue Luna, 23. And it wasn't until another young sex worker's body was found near a river in September of 1983. And it was at this time that a state trooper by the name of Glenn was able to put 2 and 2 together and come up with the conclusion that they had a serial killer on their hands. And it was at this time that they finally started to keep a little bit of a closer eye on the activities that Robert was doing. And the body was identified as 21-year-old Paula Golding. And she, like all of the other victims, was found to be shot right in the middle of the chest, and with the shell casing just next to her grave. They then formed a task force to try and figure out and identify who the serial killer was. And State Trooper Glenn requested a profile from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. When they got it back, they were told that they were looking for a very organized killer. He would blend into society, have a family, and he would likely to be married to a religious woman. He would most likely be a business owner and be an avid hunter who loves guns and the outdoors. And that the killer most likely had a lisp or a stutter. I don't know. I can't think of anyone who reminds me of these exact characteristics. And this really was just the nail in the coffin, and police just immediately right away knew that it was Robert. And police told the airport where Robert had kept his plane to keep a log of Robert's activity there. And they also checked his previous flight logs to see if the times would match up with the killings. However, Robert was a little bit smart with this, as when he would take off, he would not report his tail number, making it much harder to track him. They then began to dig into Robert's past a little bit more, where they found a report of burglary at his home. A couple years back, Robert had reported that someone broke into his home and stole all of his hunting equipment. He had used the money from the insurance company to then open his bakery. Only problem is, Robert's stuff was obviously never missing. And because of this, they were able to get a search warrant for his house again. And on October 27th, 1983 is when they took Robert into the police station yet again for questioning. While he was there, detectives then went to his house to search it again. And they hadn't found anything at all until they made their way to the attic. Under the installation in the house is where they found a map with a bunch of X's on it and a .23 caliber rifle. They also found a number of trophies from his many victims, including an arrowhead necklace that belonged to Sherry Morrow, and a fish-shaped charm that belonged to one of the other missing victims. And while all of this is being uncovered, Robert is sitting in the police station yet again, gaslighting everybody, saying that none of it is true, and he has absolutely nothing to do with anything. He said that he never shot anyone, and he has never intentionally hurt anybody a day in his life. And police kept pushing him until he eventually asked for a lawyer. And when one of the neighbors saw that police were at Robert's home, they came over to be a little bit nosy and ask what was going on. And the detectives explained the case that they were building up against Robert. And as he was explaining it, a look of dread came over her. And she soon brought over her husband, who was a friend of Robert's, to then talk to the police. He then confessed that he had given a false alibi for Robert on day one, the night that Cindy had claimed that she was kidnapped and essayed. He explained that Robert had told him that he was seeing a prostitute and didn't want his wife to know, so he asked him to cover for him. But now that the truth was finally out, he wanted to retract his alibi. And as detectives started to look at the map that had the X's on it, they started to realize that the X's were exactly where they had found some of the bodies of the missing girls. And in total, there was 21 X's on the map. And now, since the investigation was finally coming together, they wanted to talk to Cindy yet again. And they found her at a motel, and she agreed to testify against him. And despite everything the police had found, Robert still continued to deny everything, up until he was presented with the map of the locations of all of the bodies. And at this point, he finally broke down and started to confess to his crimes. However, he did not confess to everything. He claims he did not kill Celia, along with another girl, 17-year-old Megan Emmerich, and another one, 22-year-old Mary Thrill, even though all 3 of their graves were marked on the map. And there were also 2 other women that Robert confessed to killing whose bodies were never found. And Robert flew out with police to recover 7 more bodies. And in total, Robert had confessed to 14 murders. But it is believed that he killed in total 21 women. and is believed to have raped at least 31 other women. And Robert Hansen only pled guilty to 4 murders at his trial, along with the kidnapping and essay of Cindy. And he was sentenced to 461 consecutive years in prison without the possibility of parole. And Robert would spend the rest of his time in the Spring Creek Correctional Center. After Robert was found guilty, his wife immediately divorced him, sold his bakery, and moved with her kids to Arkansas. And Robert Hansen died on August 21st of 2014 from natural causes at the ripe age of 74. And that was the story of Butcher Baker, aka Robert Hansen. Thank you guys so much for watching, and be sure to like this video so I know that you enjoyed it. And also be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any future content. And with that, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye! She worked as a receptionist at a retail office. Realtor. She worked as a receptionist at a realtor office. She worked as a receptionist at a realtor's... At a what? Oh my god. Real estate. She worked as a receptionist at a real estate office. Finally.